Let's continue with the next session. Now we have two roundtables. The first one is the roundtable titled Future of Media, 1,000 Days from Now. And today we are honored to host an exceptional panel of experts who will share their insights on the evolving landscape of the media. First, in the other side of the table, we have Nick Newman from the Reuters Institute for the Study of Journalism at the Oxford University. From Ireland, we have John Sullivan from the Institute for Future Media, Democracy and Society. We also welcome Nathalie Helberger for the AA Media and Democracy Lab in the Netherlands. And lastly, we are pleased to have Alex Gutierrez from the Ariara and a member of the chair in Futures of Communication. Each speaker will present their views, and after that we will have time for discussion and questions where we encourage your active participation. So let's start with Nick's presentation, but let me introduce Nick first. Nick Newman is a senior research associate at the Reuters Institute for the Study of Journalism and is lead author of the annual Digital News Report. He also authors an influential annual report on media and technology trends. Nick has a background as a journalist and was a founding member of the BBC News website. Later, as head of product development for BBC News, he helped introduce innovations such as blog, podcasting, and mobile apps. In his talk, Nick will focus on future trends in news media, providing insights in the challenges and opportunities the media landscape will likely encounter with a 3 years overlook. So, Nick, thank you, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. So I'm going to talk a little bit using research from Digital News Report, which obviously looks at how people are consuming today, but I think it has some interesting lessons about where media is going. So it's also helpful sometimes to look about what's happened in the past to be able to see what might happen in the future. And then the other sort of piece of work that I do regularly is talking to industry a lot about the challenges they face, how they think about innovation and where they're putting their bets. So I'll try and blend a couple of those things together. And I'm really just going to focus on 5 things that I think will impact the news media in the next 1,000 days. I'm sure there's other trends, but I'm just going to do 5. So I'm going to talk a little bit about, information fatigue, some of the problems of abundance leading to many people turning away from news. I'll talk about some of the huge platform changes we're seeing right now. I'll talk about this problem of trust and what we might do about it. The business, sustainability of business, these are all quite negative things, aren't they? And then finally, I'll talk a little bit about the next wave of innovation, new technologies and interfaces. So, one of the things that the advantages of doing surveys every year in the same way is that you can really see the structural changes in terms of news consumption. And I've just picked out Spain as an example, but I could pick out almost any country in the survey. And what we're looking at here is the percentage of people who use each of these to access news weekly between 2015 and 2023. And broadly, what you see here is, it won't surprise you, the decline of traditional media. So I think we all know about the decline of print, right? At the bottom, 50% said they read a printed newspaper in Spain, down to 25%, so it's halved in that period of time. But what's really interesting to me is the decline of television. So television has traditionally been an incredibly important way of reaching, very wide range of demographics across countries, television news. And you can see how gradually 26% drop in the percentage saying they're using television news. So that is, 24-hour channels or bulletins at the end of the day. But what's also really worrying is that the percentage of people who say they're consuming news via online sources has also started to dip. So just general online, but also through social media. So you had that sort of peak and then starting to come down. Part of the reason for that is we can also look at the percentage of people who say they consume none of these sources, and you can see Spain, actually it's not as high as many other countries, but you can see it's gone from 1% to 6%. So you're starting to see a group of people who are becoming sort of disconnected from news, even news in social media. They tend to be younger, they tend to be lower educated. And then another way of looking at attention loss, this idea of attention loss, is we ask people how interested they are in news, and their definition of news maybe has changed. Maybe this is why, but I think what you see in a country like Spain is incredibly sharp declines in the percentage of people who say they are interested or very interested in news. So 34% down, and you see that across a whole range of countries. Interesting that COVID seems to be a real tipping point in many of these countries. So since COVID, we've seen this self-declared interest in news declining significantly. Not in every country, so there are a few countries where the declines have been slower, but the trends are still broadly the same, with the exception of Finland, which is always an exception for everything. And then this question of, related question of selective news avoidance, which is something we've talked about for a while. So these are people who are consuming news weekly, regularly, but they say that they also sometimes or often try to avoid the news. So on average, across all the countries, about a third, and you can see that that's, again, increased since we started asking about this in 2017. A lot of the reasons that people say is because the news is too negative, the news makes me anxious, it doesn't feel relevant to my life, I feel there's no sense of hope or agency, so some of these kind of questions. And summed up by this comment from a young person in Germany: I just want a lighter tone, it's good for it's bad for my soul, it makes me feel less anxious if it was more positive. I think this is quite worrying when we think about these ideas of public interest journalism and what, this sort of common bed of facts to help us make decisions at elections, particularly when you look at the subjects that people say they're avoiding. So it's, national politics, crime and security, social justice. And it's partly because news is difficult, and now there's always something more fun and more interesting to do on your mobile phone. So I think a trend, that we're seeing in terms of, how journalists are responding to this is can we create journalism and storytelling that isn't so relentlessly negative and anxiety-inducing? Can we not just point out problems, but maybe give people a sense of what some of the solutions might be? Can we give them more hope, more agency? So there's a big sort of movement, I think, in some countries, Germany being case in point, Denmark, towards more constructive journalism or more solutions-based journalism. And I think that's going to be a real theme of the next few years, is really sort of changing the way journalists think about what news is to make it more relevant and actually more useful to people. The second key challenge, I think, is what's going on in social media, where we're seeing these really quite significant shifts. So although social media has been one of the stories of the last decade, in terms of more people opting for this sort of convenient aggregation of news via big social networks, we're really starting to see very big changes right now in the traditional model. And the traditional model was Facebook, basically. You posted something in Facebook and you got a link, and that link took you back to your website where you could monetize it. And what we're seeing is that breaking down for a number of reasons. So firstly, the percentage of people who use these networks for news is declining, and particularly Facebook. So in 2016, 42% of people across 20 countries said that they used Facebook for news, and that's now down to 28%. And that's partly because Facebook themselves have pulled back from news and reduced the amount of news that people see in feeds because it makes people anxious. It's not good for their business model. And then you've also got this sort of rise of newer social networks. So this move to closed networking via WhatsApp and messaging apps. But then in the last couple of years, really, the rise of video networking made for mobile phones. So Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube are really the three networks that we see growing. And that's a really significant change, because in those networks, a media company needs to put more effort into creating bespoke content for those networks because all the consumption happens there. And there's virtually no revenue that comes back. So it's an even worse deal than the referral model. And I haven't even mentioned Twitter, of course, which is imploding, though you don't see that on this chart because we'll have to look at next year's data for that. The shift is even more important with younger groups. So, this sort of generational shift, I think we heard this morning about how young people are behaving differently, and you really see how this is really moving through the generations. But for this youngest generation, 18 to 24s, who grew up with social media, they're really coming off Facebook. So only 38% say they use Facebook for any purpose now across 20 countries. And you can see the rise of TikTok. So essentially this chart helps to explain why Facebook have taken all the money out of journalism and put it into creators in the last year, because they want to head off that challenge from TikTok, which is much more about the new creator economy and the influencer economy. And so this chart really also helps explain how other social media companies are also changing their strategy. So YouTube, for example, again, pushing into vertical video, YouTube Shorts, is a direct result of this sort of shift that people see. When you ask publishers, what are you doing about this? So this was our industry survey at the beginning of the year. They're basically, they know what's going on. So this is basically, are you going to put more effort into this network or less effort? They're again shifting out of these sort of traditional, they know that the game is up for this sort of referral model where you get regular traffic from these big social networks, and they are moving into this new model, which is much more about sort of accessible formats consumed on those platforms, for good or for ill. And so, I think mastering vertical video is obviously going to be a key trend for news media, and we did a report in December last year where we looked at the strategies of a range of different media companies. For example, Le Monde, who have gone for a sort of creator strategy. So essentially, many media companies are doing this. The BBC's just started, actually. So you essentially need to hire people who understand the language of young people, and they will tell the stories in these new ways. This is an example from Le Monde. You can't hear the sound here, but this is not television. This is really fast storytelling. In this case, it's a mission to explain about how the royal family works and how King Charles works and which countries he's in charge of, but using drawing and all these sort of authentic ways of telling stories. It's very fast. It's really effective. It's really informative, and it's really compressed. So there's a whole load we need to learn about that. Here in Spain, you have an excellent example of this in Actuality, which is one of the world's leading TikTok vertical video companies. And then even, I think last week, the news agencies announced that AFP announced a new product called Social Stories, essentially creating content in this sort of new format that makes it easier for publishers to take advantage of. So the third big trend that I think we need to pay attention to is declining trust. We've talked about it a lot today. And when you look at, we ask a general question about to what extent you trust most news most of the time. It's not a perfect question, but it just gives you a benchmark to be able to see what changes over time. And broadly, we see this sort of big variation. So some Northern European countries have a much stronger direct connection, much stronger pay, much stronger levels of trust. They all go together. And then you have the countries I've marked out in orange, generally larger European countries with quite divisive politics, where we've seen a decline in trust over time. So countries like the UK was 50% trust, now down to 33% trust. And a lot of that is not because British journalism's got worse, it's because people see things in the media they don't like about Brexit or about culture wars, and they blame the messenger. So increasingly the media is kind of caught in the middle of these very divisive debates. So there's some stuff around trust that we can't do that much about, and there's some things that we probably can do something about, and it's important to sort of break that apart, I think. Just a quick illustration of how politics and divisive debates affects trust. So this is taken the US figure, which is on average 32%, I think, and we've just split it by people who are on the left, liberals, self-declared liberals, 39%, so they trust, so not too bad. And then only 14% of people on the right who self-declare on the right say they trust. So you can see this massive difference. Basically, people who are supporters of Donald Trump do not trust anything they see in the mainstream media. They do not trust the narratives about the elections and whether they were stolen, and they are more likely to believe things they see in the alternative media, which aligns more closely with what they think. It's a great example of these sort of fake news narratives and how they play into trust. Whereas if you look at Finland, one of the reasons why there's very little difference between people on the left and on the right, there's much less polarization in general in society, much higher trust in a whole load of institutions as well. And then there's also this whole tendency of politicians and political activists and others to denigrate the media, to criticize the media, and ordinary people, of course, because they see more things in the media they don't like through social media. And this just shows that there is a correlation. I'm not saying it's causation, but there's a correlation between countries with generally low trust, where people say they see a lot of criticism of the media. So these things are probably connected in some way. And then into this world, of course, what's coming next is this whole fear about synthetic media, which we've heard about already, these worries about the impact of AI, whether that's shallow fake, deep fakes. We've already seen it's a huge year for elections. Almost every election we've seen, whether it's Slovakia or Poland or the United States, we've started to see this sort of mix and further blurring of what is true and what is not true. This is the Ron DeSantis campaign video that includes real images of Anthony Fauci and Donald Trump, and it's mixed it up with fake ones of them hugging, which of course they never did. People are really worried about what we're going to see in this year of elections in terms of people using this for malign purposes or for positive purposes. It's just happening all the time. AI, first Argentinian AI election. This is one I came across last week, I think. So this is a picture of a Palestinian child demonstrating reliance and innocence in the face of devastation in Gaza. This is an AI-generated picture, and it was created by a prompt in Midjourney that didn't just say, "Give me a picture of a Palestinian child." Included the words, I need this child's eyes to reflect a mixture of sadness, determination, and hope," drawing the user in. And it's really hard. It's going to be really hard to tell the difference between what has been created by artificial intelligence and what's created. Even the depth of field was specified. The camera that they wanted this fake picture to be taken in was specified in the AI prompt. So what do we do about this? What can we expect in the next 1,000 days in terms of media companies? I think really it's two things. So on the one hand, you've got big media companies like the BBC. They're going to double down on impartiality. You're going to set up these brands and these teams to verify things in real time. The criticism of Gaza was that media companies were ill-equipped to deal with the speed of that story and the claim and the counterclaim. So this sort of investment in verification technologies or techniques, it's called OSINT, so open source investigation. So more teams basically looking at this, and brands that tell you much more clearly, stamp, this you can trust, this is verified, this is BBC verified. We can see a lot more of this on the one hand. And then in the other direction, you're going to have more media brands that basically don't want to build trust with everyone, but just going to build trust with a few people who agree with them politically. So this rise of partisan media on the one hand, distributed again often through social media. So this is kind of what I expect to happen in terms of some of the trends around trust. Business of journalism under pressure. So we heard this morning, the trends and the challenges, particularly of advertising-based medium that have relied on distribution and platforms like BuzzFeed or Vice, but many others, really struggling. And then the ones relying on print as well. You've got this sort of perfect storm, which has led to layoffs. And but even those that are relying on subscription have also seen a slowing down in that business. So what we've seen broadly in our data, which looks at the percentage of people who pay for any kind of news across 20 countries, the average is 17%. And we've seen that grow significantly, tighter paywalls, coronavirus bumps, last 2 years pretty much level. And lots of people are, because of the cost of living, are not renewing or renewing at a lower rate. So this problem of retention, even of the people that you already have, let alone growth, is a huge problem in the industry. And then this problem of inequalities. So what you have is a few big media companies who absolutely now have a path to profitability and sustainability. So New York Times being the obvious case, but Helsing and Sanomat in Finland, these big brands who are really catering for a richer, better educated group of people. The question is, what happens to the rest? How do those other people get high quality news if a lot of this is going behind a paywall? And then you have a sort of second group of companies with low cost who are really delivering value in a niche that is also really working when it comes to subscription. So we definitely see some positive business models which are going to work for some media companies, but there's a whole load of stuff that's going to fall through the gaps. And a lot is changing here because of that sort of slowing down of subscription, but broadly the trends we see are publishers trying to put in more stickiness, so trying to rebundle news and games, for example, and a whole load of other value, maybe shopping, or New York Times is doing a lot of that kind of stuff, and it's one of the reasons why people are subscribing. We see this trend towards individual journalists or small companies starting to be able to build those direct connections and a sustainable business now through platforms like Substack. And then we're starting to see this all-access subscription model, New York Times being one case, but actually in Europe we have Nordic countries putting together local, national podcasts, magazines into a single package. And that's partly been done through sort of acquisition over time as well and control the market. So it's not possible to do everywhere, but I think Netherlands and Nordic countries, we're seeing a lot more of the sort of the bundling process, which is what we're going to see. And then when we talk about media companies, I think, we used to think about media companies, you were broadcast or you were a newspaper and they look pretty similar. And now we've got all kinds of possibilities in terms of what media companies might look like. And I think this is a good thing and it's a positive thing and we're going to see more of it. But for example, you can have a local news site with very low cost business model, maybe 2 reporters covering a city. They don't have a website, they don't need to keep it full 24 hours a day, they can just do 2 really valuable newsletters a week. So that kind of model may be a model which is sustainable, profitable, and fulfills a lot of the core functions of journalism. You've got social first kind of brands like Relova. This is one of the ones that really exposed the story behind the kiss and the cover-up, and it's really starting to make a difference, again, with a much lower cost base, digital first and mobile first. And then now you can create a company that's just based on a podcast. So this is a hugely successful podcast in the UK. Each of the presenters earns around £500,000 each, according to the papers, from a podcast, and they do live shows, and they're creating a US version and a leadership version, and they're creating a whole franchise based on audio. So the positive thing here is there's many more ways to make money than just thinking about newspapers and television stations, and there's much more creativity and optimism in that world. So just finally, the 5th big trend we need to pay attention to is the interface shift, which again we've already referred to today. So this move from browsers to what's next. And so I think this whole way of asking questions. This is an AI tool called Perplexity. There are many others, and you just have this intuitive conversation. So instead of reading a story about Sam Altman and what the hell's going on there, you can just ask a series of questions. So it doesn't come back with an article. It just comes back with a thing you've asked, and then it comes up with a follow-up. It's not a great example of that, but that's the basic idea. And you can do this not just in text, but in audio. So we're going to have audio bots and all kinds of new ways of interacting that just feel more natural and more human. Of course, this raises huge questions about where news brands sit in that, and what's going to happen to the intellectual property if these new aggregators effectively are able to steal all that content and represent it as their own, albeit with a small citation. So that's going to change search. But if you go to an aggregator like Artifact, for example, which reads full stories, I don't bother doing that anymore. I just click the summarize at the top button, and it will summarize that in 3 points, which gives me a much better sense of it. Or it can also say, would you like to explain it like I'm 5, or like a Gen Z? So it rewrites the story as a Gen Z, or rewrites it as emojis. So this is happening today, our content effectively being summarized and repackaged in many different ways, and this is going to be a huge challenge for us going forwards in terms of what we do. And then, are there other ways in which, you know, we don't even need to carry a phone around anymore, that we can interact with lapel pins? This is all coming. We can project things onto our hand. I don't believe this is going to happen, but it's kind of, you know, there are a whole load of things we haven't invented yet, which I think are going to be part of the new interface shift. And as Lou Dreyfus says, you know, what they see from all of this is this massive emergency on the business side, because the value is going to go increasingly to these the people who control the interfaces and can summarize your content and play it back in ways that we haven't even thought about yet. So this has felt quite challenging, a bit more negative than I was hoping. But hopefully it kind of I'm sure we can address most of these challenges. But I think you know, we have some really significant challenges about the product itself, about the negativity of the product itself, and how we deal with that. We're going to see the beginning of the end of the referral model. I don't think this is a bad thing, personally. I think it's not been a very healthy model for us in the first place. So maybe some different approaches would be a good thing. The business models, I think, as I say, there is definitely optimism there. There's some hope that some parts of the media ecosystem are working, and we can build on that. And then I think, you know, that we've talked a lot about AI already, about how we take advantage of those opportunities of AI and the new interfaces, but also we manage those risks around things like IP going forwards.
Thank you very much for your presentation. So let's continue with the next presentation by John O'Sullivan. John O'Sullivan is an assistant professor at the School of Communications at the Dublin City University and a member of the university's Institute for Future Media, Democracy and Society. He used to be a journalist for a major national newspaper focusing on digital trends. He also has been a journalism educator for many years and has published research across a range of leading communication journals. He is about to undertake a lead role in researching audiences' news consumption as part of the UA-funded Resilient Media for Democracy project. In his presentation, Dr. Sullivan will discuss the relationship between audiences and new media, focusing on why audiences are disengaging and how the media can improve. He will also suggest practical steps based on recent Irish initiative to enhance the sustainability and relevance of new media. So, John, the process.
Thank you very much, and thank you for inviting me to this very useful meeting. I'm going to make a special plea for sympathy in having to follow Nick and the powerhouse that is the Digital News Report and all those resources, and also talk about audiences. So because I am a former journalist and because I have been a journalism educator, I thought I would just put together some sort of a meta discussion about audiences and what we should be thinking about, and also with some examples of perhaps anecdotal, but still I think important kind of pivotal moments in responses to the crisis. And so, yeah, I think the audience is neglected generally in these discussions, even though I come from very, very firmly from the producer side myself. So I'm going to be looking at how the audience is sort of neglected, but how that also reflects back on media producers. Just a quick word about some of the projects in Fujo. This is just a sample of them, and we can see there Jolt looking at data technology, media ownership, political economy of news, EDMO, monitoring of platforms compliance, which of course is a hot topic now, and also fact-checking and media literacy, provenance, trying to produce a tool to verify content, for example, using blockchain, and then local media for democracy, was providing Irish research. Local media is a very hot topic in Ireland, probably because of our location next to the UK, etc., and the language and the market overlap. And then REMED, the Resilient Media for Democracy, which is my personal involvement in Fujo, and this is EU-funded research on how the media can be sustained for democratic purposes, and we're looking at professional standards, accountability, regulation, and my particular part of that is news consumption. So that's yet to kick off. So I don't have research findings to present here, which is a little strange. It's sort of flipped time-wise. And so just to sort of get to very much a high-level discussion of what we mean by audience. And usually when you have discussions of audience and the news industry crisis, we think of audience as consumers, and maybe with a sort of a bit of public interest rhetoric tacked on, but very much consumers who are there to support the viability of the industry. Also, as vulnerable victims, to be protected against various forms of malfeasances, misinformation, disinformation, AI, as we've seen, algorithms, biased news, all of that. And so we need to protect these people against the bad stuff that's going to happen and is being thrown at them by powerful forces. Or the audience itself is a commodity to be sold to advertisers. And we're all very familiar with that from social media discussions, where some guru will say, if it's free, you're the product. But that's always been the case with conventional media. Even if you're paying for it, you still are the product, unless it's advertising-free media. So this is not a new idea. This goes back to Dallas Smythe in 1981. So for public policy and media strategy, we need to be clear about what we mean by the audience. Are we talking about consumers? Are we talking about commercial widgets? Or are we talking about citizens? Are we talking about both? Probably realistically, we're talking about both. But often when we talk about citizens, it's in a tokenistic sort of way. It's the news industry claiming legitimacy, and they'll sort of genuflect to the civic role of news, etc. But behind it, we're really talking about news consumers. So distance from the audience, and how far is our news producers from their audience? And this is the idea of the news gap, introduced by Bukowski and Mitchelstein in 2013. This idea that what the audience wants is different to what producers want to give them. And producers would be sort of more high-minded, journalists would be more high-minded and want their content to be more civically relevant, and the audience prefers entertainment, celebrity, etc. But also audiences show strong preference for straight news format, so it's not a straightforward discussion or a straightforward picture. And then this idea of the breakup of the newspaper bundle with its lack of interactivity, and that erodes the accidental exposure that the audience receives when reading a newspaper, and that erodes journalists' power of audiences. So the news media is losing its agenda-setting power, especially in routine coverage, and we have evidence of globalization and convergence in audience preferences, which we've seen in Nick's presentation. So something more fundamental is in play than erosion of trust through audiences let loose on social media. So it's not just this sort of idea of the audience is defecting to social media and all these terrible things are happening with disinformation and extremism, etc. So this leads us to moving beyond metrics, beyond the idea that we can count everything to do with the audience. Sorry, just have it. And so probably points to the need for qualitative research, showing a more nuanced picture. And qualitative research, actually, I think it was part of the DNR in 2019 by Kim Schroeder, showing people have different repertoires, but many of them show strong civic or political interest. So they aren't these Philistines who aren't interested in public affairs. And they see a clear distinction between the serious and the trivial. And the interesting conclusion to that is that journalists need to trust their instinct. So you get this sort of Back to the Future idea of journalists having an imagined reader or an imagined consumer, as opposed to granular metrics to decide what to publish. And this feeds into this idea of journalists being paid for the amount of attention they garner. We saw recently the Daily Telegraph planning to link journalists' pay to article popularity. They disputed that report, but essentially there is an element of that going on there. And the Irish Times response to that was, please read this article so I can get paid. So that makes it very, very concrete and very immediate, and sort of a playful take on it. And then we have the engagement and participation myth. We have this idea, I don't know if any of you remember, perhaps it was 10 years ago, the idea of open journalism and the Guardian being very strong on it, in particular, possibly the previous regime at the Guardian, which of course is now this global behemoth. And so they have pulled back from that. We've less of that sort of rhetoric and less of those initiatives happening. This is from the current digital news report. So publishers reversing participatory initiatives. I think you can see that as a news consumer yourself. And then there is less, not more, public debate on the platforms, on the particular news outlets' platforms. And then Jacob Nelson has this book where he sets out this very interesting distinction between production-oriented and reception-oriented or metrics-driven audience engagement. And he argues that the former, that's production-oriented engagement, focuses on how many potential readers, viewers, or listeners participated in the creation of this story, how many marginalized voices were its sources, how much of the audience asked for this coverage in the first place. So it turns this idea of engagement on its head, away from pure metrics and into an active audience being part of the production of news. How you implement that is another story, but that's the concept, that the audience needs to be included somewhere in this process, which is anathema, I think, to most journalistic cultures, at least traditional journalistic cultures. So as we've seen, we've got declining consumption and declining trust, and I'm repeating Nick a little bit here, that online is not making up for the fall off in use of traditional formats. And so along with the new fall in trust, it had bumped upwards briefly. News avoidance, especially among the young, in relation to war and climate change and negative events that people don't really want to engage with. So we could ask, if news were more specifically relevant, targeted and diverse, would people still find it uninteresting or unpalatable? And in other words, if news were more related to people's actual interests. I'm not saying we shouldn't be interested in climate change, and we shouldn't be interested in Gaza, but in our neighbourhoods, even within our regions, within our countries, which isn't always the case. So you have this sort of strange batting back and forth as to who's to blame for the drift away from news. And this is a really funny one, which came up in the Irish Times recently. Why is trust in media declining? Maybe it's not us, it's you. So the Irish Times or this writer is pointing the finger at his audience, saying it's your fault, which is really strange. And it's based on this article here by a guy called Steve Boring. No, not Steve Boring. That's the outlet. Why you can't trust the media, and he's saying that the media used to be much worse. Back in the 60s, the 50s and 60s, the media actively conspired with governments to deceive their audiences, and they don't do that anymore. But that's not really a very strong argument in favour of trusting the media. So it's a really sort of shallow and feeble argument. But it's interesting that that has taken off there. And then we have to ask, I suppose, does journalism need to be protected? When we see journalists risking their lives in Gaza, you say, absolutely, of course it does. But then on the wider level, you say, well, you have to think about why is journalism is important. I've heard journalism referred to as an industry a lot today. Of course it's an industry, but we're supposed to think it's more than that. And so journalists, their claims for legitimacy, which increase in volume as their position is eroded. I think 20 years ago we didn't hear so much about how important journalism is in the public domain. So we have the ideas of the fourth estate and speaking truth to power, holding the powerful to account. Democracy dies in darkness, which is the Washington Post's slogan. Afflicting the comfortable and comfort afflicted. All of these are very good things. They're very hard to argue with. And so everyone has their say. And as we saw in respect of the BBC and other public service broadcasters, of the journalism is meant to be objective, balanced, impartial, and trusted. That raises the question, whose objectivity? Objectivity is a very, very difficult topic to pin down. So I wish the BBC looked with that, because the BBC is always going to be on the wrong side for some point of view. And then we have this neglect of audiences in this. I mentioned it at our table discussion there. We have this simplistic opposition between misinformation and, quote, proper journalism. That misinformation and disinformation is coming from all these bad guys out there, and therefore, by extension, mainstream journalism doesn't really have to worry about too much. But of course, it strikes me that we often have a very theoretical discourse around news media when we're talking about these issues, because there is a long tradition in media studies of critiquing mainstream media along these lines, around private commercial ownership, dependence on advertising, dominance of official and business, including conservative economics voices, elite access to employment and media, and then that leading to the liberal consensus post the financial crash, globalization versus regional and local news. And again, that's a huge issue. How does a regional Irish newspaper, or one in Holland, or in a smaller European country challenge and survive in the face of the Financial Times, the Guardian, and the New York Times, etc. We have problems around agenda setting, we have problems around news values, and we have problems around framing, and of course, very obviously, we have problems around tabloidization. Excuse me. And then we've just got plain bad journalism, which often doesn't get an airing in these discussions, and we have to recognise that there is bad journalism there, and this should inform our ideas as to whether we want to protect it. And we saw recently the scandal in the UK of Suella Braverman's inciting a protest in London, and those attacks being relayed by the press, by the mainstream conventional press. We saw the British Prime Minister actively lying about housing and being found out, following on the example of Boris Johnson. So we don't need to go to social media to find misinformation and extremism. It's there anyway. So there's a concern that we look to tech-led solutions, that we use solutionism. There must be a solution to this. There must be a technology that can address this. But these are deeper problems in journalism practice. So I'm not sure how I'm doing on time, but just to give you a little airing of this anecdote about what I think is a really pivotal moment in Irish public service broadcasting and public service media. And it's basically the massively overpaid celebrity presenters being found out getting paid even more. This guy, Ireland has a population of 5 million people. He's being paid over €500,000 a year to present a TV program. And so this has engendered an existential problem for Ireland's public service broadcaster. And so the response to that has been to enforce cuts. So we've got more commercial logic, more cutting, journalists losing their jobs, and a really negative response. And then the audience comes in. The audience has its say on that, and a lot of people are refusing to pay their license fee on the strength of this. And it's a real crisis for RTE, the public sector broadcaster. And this actually echoes the sort of political pressure you see occasionally on the BBC license fee as well. There's always this debate, attacks from Conservative politicians on the BBC and threats to its license revenue. So new and continuing developments, I don't think I need to dwell on this too much, and I'm probably going to hop along because I'm feeling I'm probably pushing it on time, am I? Not sure. Yeah, okay. So anyway, the shift to misinformation and disinformation. But again, I think not looking at more fundamental problems of alienating audiences and why those audiences are alienated. Globalization and convergence, more distance from audiences, again, more redundancies in newspaper, with the loss of reporting capacity and the increased dependency of the press. So you've got more client journalism happening. And then we have the AI conundrum. And we saw Build firing 200 editorial staff there while adopting AI. And some people were describing that as liberating these people. You know that rhetoric about how technology frees you up to do more interesting things, except you're doing it here outside of your employment with Build. So this has implications for how audiences perceive news themselves, how our audience is going to take to this new environment. Just to finish up more or less, this is a very timely moment because there has been a sort of sea change in official attitudes to media in Ireland, which used to be very laissez-faire, very hands-off until this crisis came along, but also driven by the platforms and the difficulty that media is having with platforms. So they came up with 50 well-researched proposals. Fujo fed in strongly into this, and so one of the ones is just a declaration that public service content is a critical public infrastructure, not just broadcasting, but public service content generally. They want to have diversity boards and leadership to improve diversity in media organizations, a new public funding model for PSM, and increased accountability and transparency. All of the good things, and I'm really summarizing here. Media access and training scheme to get people into media beyond the university route, so that media is more diverse and reflects the audience better. Also a quite strong signal to implement the copyright directive to redress the imbalance in favour of traditional publishers. So this is kind of a refreshing change in the mood music in Ireland, and I think it's probably instructive for our debate more generally. And so out of that came the Media Commission, which is implementing some of these, and it's already happening. So they have widened the regulatory brief beyond broadcasting into content more generally. The Commission is hiring 150 staff, some of them media researchers. The internships idea is being taken up taken up. More opportunities for Irish language journalists, again, minorities getting more of a play. Local media grants, that was one of the topics that came up in our discussions earlier on, the problem that local media has in all of this, and sports media supports. And also part of that was a particular support for local authority / council meeting reporting and courts reporting. So routine, bread and butter, unglamorous, boring, uneconomic, but vitally important for democracy. And then just finally, just a word on REMED, which also ties into a lot of what we're talking about. The Irish section, DCU is leading the section dedicated to audience research, studying citizens' news repertoires, and how people cope with extreme content and misinformation and disinformation. The co-creation of media literacy solutions, so it's not going to be a top-down approach. We're going to have workshops with citizens and on a local basis. And the intention of the overall REMED project is to inform European policy, and the timeline for that is up to 2025. And that's just started. So that's where we're at. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your presentation. Let's continue with the next speaker, Natalie. Natalie is distinguished university professor for law and digital technology with a special focus on AA at the University of Amsterdam. She is one of the founders and director of the AA Media and Democracy Lab and leader of a 10-year program, Aljosoc, funded by the Dutch government to research public values in the algorithmic society. Natalie has contributed to the Dutch AA research agenda and is a member of the Council of Europe Committee on Resilience in Journalism. Additionally, she regularly advises the European Commission, the European Parliament and Dutch government on anticipatory thinking within the emerging digital regulatory framework. Her expertise focuses on the governance of digital technologies. In her presentation, Natalie will provide insights into the AA Media and Democracy Lab and discuss the importance of anticipatory thinking in the evolving digital regulatory framework. Thank you very much, Natalie. The floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you also for organizing that and bringing us all together in a very inspiring conversations. And I would like to do a couple of things. First of all, I would like to speak a bit about the law, and I strongly disagree that the law is boring. At the moment, it's actually really exciting because with the new AI Act, every day is different. So stick with me. We also talked a lot about citizens and the importance of how to involve them. And something that I also would like to do is present some research where we actually not only talk about involving them, but really try to involve them. And finally, I will make an argument that the future of media is also strongly dependent on the legal developments going on and our ability to govern risks. Because, as you know, we lawyers, we kick on risks and dangers, and that's what I'm going to talk about. But Bertrand also asked me to say a few words about the AI Media Democracy Lab, which is one of the first ELSA labs in the Netherlands. Our mission is to do research into the impact of current and future uses of AI tools in the news media to enable the news media to fulfill its democratic role. And the special thing here is that we do this in close collaboration with our industry partners. So it's very much about co-design, co-creation, and so far. And it's an interdisciplinary bunch of 25 plus researchers. We keep growing. And the idea is to really set down a space to experiment, understand, and ask critical questions. So these are some of our media partners. BBC is among them, by the way, DBG, Bayerischer Rundfunk, and a lot of cultural organizations. But we also really believe that it's important to bring civil society into this debate, as well as regulators, and also local regulators, like the city of Amsterdam. Just give you some ideas of what we're doing. So we're building tools, for example, novel metrics for diversity-sensitive recommenders, very hot topic, but also using AI for disinformation detection and also experimenting with new approaches to participatory foresight and risk assessment. And some of that I would like to present. As I said, the future of the media very much also depends on legal developments, which I observe that we tend to ignore in these debates. So it's not only technology that is driving all these but also law. And the European Commission has been very active in the past years to put out a whole range of new proposals that will change the course of the media and how we deal with innovation. The European Media Freedom Act was mentioned, the Digital Services Act, the Digital Markets Act, the Data Act, the AI Act, and there are many more that did not fit on this slide. The overall idea is that these rules all must create the conditions for competition, for contestability of market power, for innovation and the responsible use of digital tech in an incredible, dynamic, and impossible to predict environment. So the big challenge for all of us, but also for regulators, is to actually govern uncertainty. And there are a lot of references in the current laws to known and foreseeable risks. So really this feeling that we need to develop new ways to understand actually what the impact is, and the advantages, but also the risks. Which starts with understanding the potential impacts and reasonable foreseeable risks from regulatory choices themselves. And I'm not sure who of you this is following, but I just mentioned the AI Act. The latest proposal is to do away with all regulation for foundation models anyway and build on self-regulation and standardization. So what is happening right now in Brussels, that there's the trilogue, I'm not sure if you know that, where the European Commission, the European Parliament, and the Council have put their different versions of the AI Act, and now they're negotiating and trying to figure out what will make it into the final act. And what you see not really happening a lot in these negotiations, also because they go at a breakneck speed, because it needs all to be finished before the Hungarian presidency and the new elections in the European Parliament, is to consider what are the potential implications of that for innovation. And couldn't resist to show you 3 possible scenarios. And very briefly, and maybe we go into that in the discussion more in depth. So at the moment, there are really different scenarios out there that could influence the course also of the media using AI in very different ways. So there's, for example, the approach of the European Parliament that really wants to have ground rules for everybody, for all providers of ChatGPT and co, foundational models or general purpose AI, to guarantee a level of safety, but also respect for copyrights. Someone has been mentioning copyrights this morning, fundamental rights, environment, risk management. So here, the legal incentives for developers is to ensure a high level of safety and value-oriented design, which could actually be good news for media organizations that want to use these models, because probably they will reduce the legal risk from using this model considerably, and hopefully increase trust, so that all these solutions that Nick introduced as these new AI interfaces are actually safer to use. But these rules also impose heavy burdens on developers of these models, which means it's probably a disincentive also for media organizations to build their own models. Instead, they will use existing ones. A very different scenario would play out if the council gets its will. According to the council, we should regulate as minimally as possible generative AI, only in high-risk areas, and media is not high risk. But still, the eye of the legislator will be also on foundational models used in the media, which is that there's at least a soft incentive to align with fundamental rights, respect for copyright, ownership, and so far. But because there's much less regulation, at least legally, there could be also an incentive to train more own models, for example, large media organizations. And then there was this surprise approach that popped up 2 weeks ago and is now very much pushed by certain governments in Europe, which says don't do anything, don't regulate foundational models, no way. I leave it to self-regulation and standardization. And if you would think that true, essentially it would leave it to the large providers of generative purpose AI to determine what responsible use is and what the risks are to society. So we had this discussion also at the table, actually, that it's essentially big tech and big tech from US deciding what kind of values should go into these systems. And the only way that we can get a grip on that in Europe is by exercising political pressure on standardization organizations to give us some standards of what responsible AI is. The problem with standardization organizations is that, to my knowledge, there are no media companies at all present in these standard discussions. So you see already how, at the moment, we are playing with different ideas on the table that could develop very different scenarios of how the future of the media might unfold. And in a recent article, I used a future legal scenario to do a critical analysis of this shift of letting big technology companies and standardization bodies decide what the values should be. I also promised you that we try to look into how to actually actively engage citizens, and that is the second project that we're doing right now that I would like to present to you together with two colleagues, Professor Nick Diakopoulos from Northwestern and Kimon Kieslich from the UvA, where we actually develop a scenario-based, diversity-sensitive method to evaluate the societal impact of AI systems and regulation. Because our ability to govern development, deployment, and governance of AI very much depends on our ability to understand not only the positive effects, but also the risks and how to mitigate them. Which is the goal of this method, to help policymakers, but also media organizations and professionals to assess risk and potential problems. And the idea here is that we at the moment have a major lack of research. We talk a lot about audiences and we talk a lot about risks, but we do not talk about involving audiences in risk assessments. So where are these audiences? Most impact assessments are actually expert-driven or driven based on literature reviews. So there's no audience here. And so the idea of the CASMI project is to actually look into risk assessment frameworks and experiment with new forms of anticipatory government, so anticipating the impact of technology development to help us safeguard fundamental rights, and use scenario writing as a method. Because scenario writing is, we found actually a method that is engaging and can allow to translate complex, also legal concepts, into something that almost everybody can relate to and express so. So we built on ideas of participatory foresight, and the whole idea is there to do so with a diversity of stakeholders and citizens to tap in their lived reality and ask them, how do you think will generative AI affect you in 5 years? And the point there is that you then get different perspectives from different contexts and understand more how people engage with the technology, but also how they think that in their own life, in their own reality, there will be an impact. This could be a positive impact, but also a negative impact. And I will present you very briefly the results of our first study, where we actually collected, reached out to 150 users across Europe, 50 content producers, 50 technology producers, and 50 citizens. And in total we got, and we asked them to write a scenario, essentially. What do you think, how will ChatGPT affect you in 5 years? And we collected 120 scenarios. We prodded them to think about the negative impact. I should say that here as well. You could also do something like that with a positive impact. And then we coded the results. And don't read this because it's against all rules of how to design a PowerPoint slide. The main point here is that we gave them certain tasks. So write a fictional scenario, 300 words, to explore how generative AI will create risk or negative impacts for you, for your environment, as either a content producer or a technology provider or a consumer in 5 years. And then we explain them what generative AI is and give them some special instructions of how we would like these scenarios to be, to bring some element of standardization into. And that we did in a kind of a survey setting. And then we got them to write. Again, don't read this. I can share the slides. But this is one of the examples of a scenario. The basic story here is a news photographer who, because of commercial and time pressure, finally succumbs to using ChatGPT, which then creates a picture of a real person, actually, that has been suspected then to commit a crime, but the system hallucinated this person, and because of that, someone innocent got. Yeah, it's a wild story, but there are interesting elements to that. So we got 120 of these scenarios, and then we identified the different impact themes. Again, don't read all this; it's a lot. I will share the slides. But there are some interesting things for the first thing that you notice is the impact themes are hugely diverse. So normally if you talk about ChatGPT and media, you inevitably end up with disinformation, fake news, and deep fakes, and that's basically it. And then if you talk to journalists, there will be also questions about labor and so. But I think what is interesting with this method is that we got a very broad range of different impacts that people imagine. And we also saw divergences, so where citizens, for example, were much more concerned about well-being and autonomy. Technology developers were very much concerned about using control of the technology. I think interesting is also that all groups convened on that issues around media quality are a potential problem, and they had a whole range of different scenarios, concerns that they saw materializing in a couple of years, including issues that are not discussed in the policy discourse, for example, around the AI Act, like issues of opinion power or making you addictive to the use of these technologies. Something else interesting, what happened is that even unprompted, many of them not only highlighted the risks, but also possible mitigation strategies. And I think this is something really interesting to see. So we are not sitting ducks that are, assaulted by technology and somehow, need to live with it. Out of the scenario come a whole variety of suggestions of what to do and how to mitigate this risk to also benefit from a lot of the opportunities. And these mitigation strategies reach from technological approach, where predictably, especially the tech developers went actually really into deep detail to try to write us in 300 words a future technology to solve these issues. I also found the sections on collective action interesting, because if you look into the AI Act, if at all citizens are addressed as individuals and not as collectives. But in the scenarios, there were actually a lot of solutions that pointed towards collaboration and civil unrest and collective action. So one possible takeaway from that could also be, if we regulate for that, we should not only regulate for individual citizen side, but maybe also make room for more collective forms of intervention to democratize the mitigation of risks and help restoring journalistic quality. So future of media, 1,000 days from now on, maybe it's not so much a prediction, but much more a hope. One hope is that the European institutions succeed in agreeing on solid ground rules for general purpose AI and fundamentation model. that media organizations will pay more attention to future impacts and really think this through before they unleash all these technologies on us citizens, positive and negative, and maybe for that adopt new methods. So, for example, like participatory risk assessments. I also hope that regulation and self-regulation will actually heed some of the insights from this exercise to not only focus on the individual, but also on society and the impact on society and collective action. And that we understand that mitigating impacts and risks there's no one-size-fits-all solution, but the audience is strongly heterogeneous. So we also need to diversify mitigation strategies, and in doing so, involve affected communities. Thank you very much.
Many thanks for your presentation. Let's continue with the last presentation by Alex Gutierrez. Alex Gutierrez, our last speaker, is the media desk editor at Ara newspaper and a contributor at Catalunya Radio, ICAT FM, and El Monde. With a journalism career dedicated to media and technology since 1996, Alex is one of the founders of Ara Media Outlet. Previously, he was chairman of Fundació ESCAC, chief editor at Comunicació 21 Group, and associated professor at Pompeu Fabra University. He's also the author of Objectiu TV3, a comprehensive book of the 40-year history of the Catalan Public Radio and Television Corporation. In his keynote, he will analyze the contrasts between media innovation narratives and the realities of day-to-day journalism. The focus will be on the upcoming 1,000 days, offering a unique perspective to determine what changes are possible and what are not in this time frame. They will also share some predictions for the next 1,000 days. So, Alex, thank you very much, and the floor is yours.
Thank you for your kind invitation. Being the fourth voice here, I think that I'll remix that so it won't be much a presentation, but some random thoughts, because I think that the basic outlets have been beautifully laid by our colleagues. So I'll try to give the perspective from someone who is working at a newspaper and that sees some of the problems laid out here, and how do we cope with that? What are the consequences on the day-to-day basis that we think that we suffer or we benefit from this situation. Before that, when they asked me to lay out some predictions or educated guesses or intuitions or wishful thinkings, as Natalie said sometimes, for 1,000 days ahead, I thought, well, let's see what has happened on the previous 100 days before that. That brings us to the day, it's 26th of February of 2021. So that was, we were in the middle of a pandemic, and we had yet to see the war in Ukraine, Israel, and the big rise in artificial intelligence. And although these are major changes, and it's undeniable that these are changes that will be felt for a long time, I would say that the big change for me is one that you have to go back actually to 1996. And it's when internet becomes commercially available. I think that the media then, at least in Spain, it was the year that everyone got his first modem with all these noises and you had to hang up the telephone if you wanted to connect. This is a year that newspapers specifically, but media in general, discovered that maybe they weren't, or how inefficient they were. I think that media had been run on a matter of faith for a long years, and you put a full-page advertisement on a newspaper, and you hoped that someone would buy a Volkswagen because he saw this piece of paper between 60 other papers for news. No? And I think that what internet brings is the big shuffle from that. It crashes that system. Media discovered that what it adds in value, then he cannot monetize, because other people are the ones who take advantage of the new system. And I think we are still here. So when I see at 1,000 days ahead, and this is 18th of August 2026, and I think that, of course, AI is relevant today. Everything is relevant, fake news is information, but I think that in order to fix what we see as threats, we have to consider that we have homework still due. And that homework is to say, okay, all the information is expensive, and it's a public good. And it's expensive, and it's very difficult to make money of it, because if I work for a month and I get a scoop, that scoop will last only 10 minutes until the next media can copy the good things of that. Maybe they will quote our newspaper in my case, maybe they won't. And this problem, which has been going on for years, it's the same problem actually, and Natalie was speaking about, of AI. AI, for me, the main problem, there are two big problems, no? All the frontera, no? The frontier or the border between fact and fiction, and also copyright issues. So AI, it simply steals nowadays without quoting. So this destroys the value of what's being produced here, which is information, and hopefully good information. No? So I think that this is the bigger picture for me when we see 3 years from now. But as long as we are focused on what's actually happening these days, I would say that also that the fake news have been with us for a while. And I think that sometimes we have speech, a narrative, between deepfakes, for example. No? We were talking about deepfakes. I looked at Google Trends, and the first peak at Google Trends of the deepfakes was 2018. So this is farther than 1,000 days. No? But I think that it's also a new skin for an old problem, because fake news had been around. And of course, Milei and all those people are using that. And of course, you see in Twitter photographs of the conflict that are either created, or you don't need deep fakes. You just have to steal a picture from 10 years ago when you see some fire and you put it down. So for me, technology is not the solution. For me, the solution is cultural and is journalistic. The solution won't be applied without technology. So it's not that I am denying the paper of technology, but as I see it, at least from a newsroom, I think that the technology is a tool, and then as is a tool for evil or for dark agendas, etc., is also a tool for building trust, etc. I think that we have still yet to answer what are fake news for. So what's the ultimate goal for fake news? And I think that the key here is that fake news, disinformation, etc., tries to break connection, tries to break the fabric of society, because what it does is like saying, okay, there's no shared factuality, because everyone is entitled, not to their own opinion, that of course everyone is, but to their own set of facts. And I think that this has been the big impact. And of course, again, technology, AI, etc., will amplify the effects. What we have seen now is that all those things that, for me, were present or latent, or so in waiting in 1996, have been exponentially exploded, because technology allows that, and we have been slow at presenting a solution for that. So when things that I said that I thought, okay, in ARA we are doing this and that maybe is useful. For example, good news. No? We are talking. Nick was talking of the doom scrolling, the feel that everything that news is tiring. That reading so much news can literally get you knackered because you can't stand it anymore. At ARA, we are the youngest of the newspapers in Barcelona, so we took an optimistic approach. Maybe some would say a naive approach, but and because of our first editor, which came from, he was a specialist in grow up, so in paternity and things of family issues. So we know that as a newspaper we have the civic duty to serve our citizens, but also those citizens, those audience, public, etc. We were talking about. They are not only citizens; they are family men and women. They are consumers, etc. And we feel that in Catalonia, as you know, we have had very intense years of politics. So we are now in a hangover. If people in the world is exhausted because news and Trump, etc., we have all of that. We have Trump exhaustion, Bolsonaro exhaustion, Melania exhaustion, but we also have our own thing, exhaustion, which is, believe me, for the people who are not from here, really, really tiring. So we have seen that at the same path, at exactly the same path that our politics articles were going down in audience, all the society, which would be like life, education, health issues, were going up. So we have actually increased our audience without all the steroids from politics, which of course we still cover and cover as deeply as we can. But this part of live, let's call it live journalism, has been very useful for us. For example, one trend in Ara that it's really surprising, it's interviews. Interviews are working excellent with our audiences. On Sunday, for example, there are like 8, 9 interviews, different interviews, 8 and 9. So you have a lot to choose from, and of course they are competing for attention with each other. But 4 or 5 are on the top 10 most seen articles on a given Sunday, on any given Sunday. So I think that when this happens is that people are looking for a reality, which is something that when we were talking about social networks give or apparently give. So you get a sense of connection where you are following someone from his bedroom. So when you're interviewing something, this is happening. And I think that for us, this means people are looking into connections. We were talking also about data-driven journalism and audience-given. And this is very interesting for us because we have a lot of data all the journalists have access to the data and have to confront to the data. I think that this is good and bad. So it's good because it has forced us to realize which things work and which things don't work. And when we do that, then you have to have one eye on the data, but one eye on the mission. And if the mission is that, for example, transgender rights are important, we know that it will have a small audience, but if we think that they are core to our mission, we assume that this piece. But sometimes we did things, we wrote things that we thought that they were of interest, and they weren't even part of the mission. So we said, okay, why do that? The problem is that you can go to the other side and, of course, only write what you think that people want to read. And I think that one of the best things that a newspaper can do, or media can do, is to tell what you didn't know that you wanted to know. So this thing of surprise for me is very important. So, and I think that as long as you apply those kind of politics that you can give connection, that you go not against, but for the fabric tissue of your society, of your community, this is very important. Also, on that same matter, and we saw it with a spelling bee at the New York Times, all the vertical things, vertical communities are working. So again, it's you have to create a bond, and it's an emotional bond. It's not only an intellectual bond. About the media landscape, when I see the media landscape from 1,000 days ago and I project it, if we see the casualties, The casualties are BuzzFeed News, layoffs at Vox Media and Insider, Vice filed for bankruptcy. So, and the New York Times has more than 10 million subscribers. And in 2000, so 3 years ago, it had only 5 million. So in these 3 years, has been able to double. And I think that the lesson here is that big legacy media, the big ones, are working because we need very strong lighthouses that signal not only signal a way of doing journalism. For me, the problem is smaller markets and local markets. We have seen like 20 years before in United States, each medium city had 2 or more newspapers, and now they have 1 or 0. So of course we have a problem of plurality here. No? AI. For AI, I think that we have been toying with AI from the newsroom point of view. So everyone has written the article saying, okay, this article, the first paragraph was written by AI. Okay, nice, but what next? So I think for me the challenge here is like to retain attribution and to be able to fix the monetization of this. When I thought, I think it was in your presentation that you said that they had built like 2,000 people fired, and you said liberated.
200,
yeah.
Liberated.
So that's it. For me, that's the key on all the AI thing. That it's if they can be liberated by a machine, that if you have been playing a bit with it, it's so unreliable. It's like an unreliable to the end version of Wikipedia, because it looks and it won't be in some years, but nowadays it's still unreliable. Then if your job is capable, a machine can, or AI can do that, maybe you weren't, that system wasn't very well planned. Maybe you had to be on the street, because the AI won't be on the street. You have to be interviewing persons, because a machine won't be able to interview a person, and each conversation is unique, and you have, if you work it very hard, then you have something that is unique. No? So for me, that's very, very important. And it really got my eye, that thing about metrics-oriented to production-oriented. No? How many people have intervened in the production of an article? And one thing that we are still largely missing is diversity in our newsroom, in our media. So, female, so to start for the things that's better, that it's, okay, females now have been able to occupy editorial senior staff, but it's still a minority. Although if we're in a university, I teach here, and it's 85% of female students. So the proportion and diversity of race or ethnicity, origin, or how you want to call it, no? So, oops, that's a nice vibration. So, in order to allow some time for the space, I think that we have to do several homework, and I'll finish with that. I think that we have to think deeper on what causes the fake news, what's their agenda, and because they are a very different typology, but they share these common things of looking for disconnection and looking for destroying just the possibility to have a place to debate. We have to be more interdisciplinary, because we have to work with technological, but tech has to work with us, because today, and journalists also have to be more involved in their media and their decisions, the business decisions that their media adopt, because they affect this. I think we have to, it's a bit naive to put it like that, but I wrote Fix the Internet. So I think that 2 weeks ago, something like that, we saw Elon Musk in his always extravagant fashion, having a beef with Jimmy Wales. And I think it's like very significant for me, or very relevant, and that Musk is like bullying Wikipedia, which is with all its flaws and inaccuracies, for me, it's what internet can be. So it's a thing that's collaborative, universal, etc. And since Musk has bought Twitter, well, I think we can all agree that now this Agora, which was supposed to be the main digital debate for public debate, is just a mess, to say the least, and also declining. So in 1, 2, 3 years' times, there will be changes like this. No? So corporations must evolve. And I think that, well, one thing that we have not, so multiverse, no? We have not talked about multiverse, that it's AI related. I think that we can now see that in, there's that what's called the Garner's hype cycle. I think it's a thing. I think it's something that will eventually become important, but not now. I think that we have to also keep an eye in the Fediverse, that they say, that a federative where we see now different big social networks and big actors and big telecoms, etc. That each one has its own trench, but I think that the future will be a bit more liquid. It's the same with when we see at freedom of speech and circulation of speech, etc. When we see that it's USA versus China versus European Union. So I think that also we have to really be very active in supporting that the European Union finds this third way between these two giants. And I think I'll leave it here, and if there are some questions, I'll be more than happy to expand some of these threads. And sorry for being a bit dispersed, but that's the internet, no? So thank you.
Thank you very much, Alex, for sharing your ideas with us. Now it's time for discussion and questions. So if you have any question for the speaker, for Nick, John, Natalie, or Alex? Yasmina?
Yeah. So thank you very much to everyone for your presentations. I really enjoyed them. I have a question around confidence that's come up a lot in the discussions. You mentioned John and in particular, what my question is
Yeah, I'll start on that. So no, I don't think it's going to be very effective with people who don't trust the media. It might be a little bit effective with people who are sort of wavering, and I think it's important to do anyway. I think in a world where this is going to become even more difficult, I think to give people shortcuts to help them know what's true and what isn't true, or what's been through a process, and I think that's going to be important. I think we're going to need a whole load of, you kind of need a second strategy for people who are distrustful or who've become just cynical of all media, and which, is a much wider question for a range of people in society, but, digital literacy. I think there are other, and reaching out, I was on a panel yesterday with Norwegian public media who've done an amazing job of sort of connecting with people as they tell stories and listening and, just building that into the fabric of what they are. I think that's another really interesting strategy beyond just labeling, this is true, this isn't true, but actually showing to people regularly that you're listening. I think that's another thing you can do. But this is challenging, particularly to reach those people who just have no trust in mainstream media, who just don't believe anything mainstream media says. I think that's just a massive challenge.
I would just say I think that latter strategy is much more important than verification, and is much more profound, including people in production of news and making it more inclusive and diverse. I find the verification, I think Euronews has been doing for a long time, there's something quite shallow about it, and fairly pat. I watched one on the BBC the other night, BBC Verified, doing this question as to whether there were tunnels under that hospital in Gaza, and it was at the end you were sort of left to make up your own mind, but we've done the techie bit for you, you know. So there was a sense of performance about it that wasn't really that meaningful in terms of journalism, I thought, and I often think that, and I just wonder if it's one of those phases that, you know, the sort of showcasing of, you know, technical prowess that we see when we come to news and news solutions, and we've seen a litany of those over the last 2 or 3 decades. So I'm not sure about verification.
Yeah, and also I think that there are some sites that have a very strong bias, political bias. So, for example, if I think in Spain we have Neutral, which is from Ana Pastori, and it's clearly left-leaning. So even though the process is a due process, the due diligence, it's well done, it's a good verification, I am pretty sure that everyone from the right or far right automatically dismisses it. And I think that they have a bias on selecting the target and on choosing what are they going to debunk. But I insist, the fact-checking is a well-done fact-checking. And also I'm a bit worried also about the people that say that they don't consume news, because I'm not that sure about them. And I'm not sure if some of them are actually consuming news or political stuff, let me say spam. For example, when in an entertainment show like El Hormiguero, they invite a far-right politician to say things, is that people consuming news or no? Is it people making up his or her mind, their mind as a citizen, and will vote on what she or she sees? And maybe she said, okay, I don't like the news, I live without the news because all media, blah, 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 and he's swallowing this kind of content, which is not news as we would define, but you know what I mean, no?
It was very interesting related to the last year, well, more than 2 years ago, we conducted a series of focus groups relating to news consumption and news avoidance, because we are very interested in our department in study news avoidance. And related to this, we asked the participants about their news consumption, and some of them say that they don't consume news. But the next question, when they started to talk about social media, they said in the same conversation, I mean, this next question, they said, yes, because I follow other media outlets in my social media, in Instagram. In that case, was Instagram the most prominent social media in this focus group. And yes, I see the news, and so in this case, maybe the question is, people is conscious that they are consuming news, and they know the difference between information, news. Well, one of the questions that we had from this focus group. Yes, Macarena? No, we have. Sorry.
I wonder if you can have. Hello. Yeah, good. I wonder if you can have, if you can share any thoughts about where is trust moving to. So this is also related to what is news and what are the stories that we consume. So there's so much data about people listening more to stories and podcasts and then the series and that kind of other kind of consumption. And I was also taken by your, when you were, Alex, talking about how there was a rise on the reading of interviews. And so is it all this about trust and where trust might be moving to, more related to our effective way of relating to information? And then if that is the case, how can we relate this to the question of echo chambers at the end? So whether this move, if I can like kind of close this kind of, this is not a question, it's a comment, but now the move would be whether this move about trust and confidence has also to do with an avoidance, has to do with I just want to consume the kind of stories I feel that I can connect to, and I would just disconnect from the rest. And if that would be the case, where should we be looking for trust? You know what I mean? Because in a way, the mistrust of the news is also mistrust of politics and democracy as well. That is a word that we haven't mentioned here, but has been in all your presentations. So I wonder, yeah, where should we be looking for trust?
It's a really good question. I think for some people, trust has moved from a sort of hierarchical top-down, you know, we trust this organization because we don't know any different, and now in a world of abundance you see all these alternatives. So trust has also gone down, but it's not, some of it is quite healthy. It's about actually just being skeptical of information, which is probably a good thing, and we have all these sources to be skeptical about. So some of the trust that's gone is, I think, not a bad thing. And then some of it's gone into populists. You trust blindly, you know, somebody who gives you a simple answer to very complicated problems, or it goes to people like me, people who look like me, who talk like me, who can sort of level with me in a way that, more horizontal, if you like, to friends or family. But on the other, it also depends what kind of story you're talking about. So for some, you know, you trust the politician, you trust the podcast because that podcast is really informal and it's presented to someone of my age or whatever. But when it comes to the war in Ukraine, we absolutely see people going to the trusted brand for those kind of stories, albeit for a short period of time because they think that material is going to be more reliable. So we saw people turning on the television, young people, we saw young people turning on televisions. Things like that. So it's a complicated concept.
Can I add just one thing? If this was a personal question, so where I would say go, and you were talking about echo chambers, I would say go to the media, to the outlet that occasionally annoys you. Because that's the thing. I think this, we have seen it in the New York Times, for example. They had a resignation of the head of opinion because now the audience or some public doesn't want to read conflicting arguments or arguments that conflict with their things. So they say, okay, I don't think like him, but it's not like I don't think like him. I don't want him to put his opinions on the newspaper. We have felt this at ARA as well in a much smaller scale. And then I think that it's the age of the individual. So the trust is individuals. And this is because I think that journalists have to rearrange their position at the newspapers. I think that the big brands retain their value, like BBC, New York Times, etc. But if you are a small brand, you have to really achieve that your staff is able to connect with these people and to build this trust from the bylines of every article. So I think that the brands have been seen. So every exaggeration has got a basic truth in it. When people distrust the brands, it's because big brands usually have been seen much closer to the power than they should be. Brands are owned by billionaire people. Brands are owned by banks, by funding trusts. And I think that this is a conflict. So that's why we are seeing a rise. We saw it in one of Nick's landslays. No, we saw that it's still humble, but individual journalists, Patreons, etc., can be. But I believe in brands and in big media. But I think that the main stone is bottom up, not the other way around.
Thank you. I might have missed the presentation, so I hope it was touched upon, but I was wondering what role do you believe blockchain as a technology can play with regards to trust and transparency?
I did mention very briefly a project that Fujo is running, thanks Nick, on blockchain for verification, so that you know where the content is coming. You know what its provenance is. That's the name of the project. So I'm not sure is the complete answer. It's a tool. It may work, it may not. But that is a possibility. I'm not so sure if we're going to see every single piece of content tagged like that, so it can be identified. But it probably has a role.
Yeah. Okay. I'm a bit sceptical because I think that a lot of news is just remix of all kinds of things, isn't it? It's different bits of information you picked up from different things. You can write a scoop, your scoop, as you were saying in your talk, right? It's just taken and a lot of that is kind of traditional fair use, right? So I don't think that's going to stop. I don't think it should stop, actually. So what is the problem we're trying to solve? So one of the problems we're trying to solve is that picture that was taken in Gaza, is it a real person or is it a Palestinian? Is it made up? And I just think we're going to be overwhelmed. There's going to be so much stuff out there because people are going to receive this stuff from different platforms that is copied and pasted in different ways. It's just going to be really hard to show the original authenticity of this thing. I think there are ways in which we need to, and again, blockchain is kind of just a technology, isn't it? I think can we clearly identify and label that in the fragmented, complicated, mad world of distribution right now? I'm just skeptical. I don't know. I might be wrong.
Do you think there's enough experimentation going on with media brands?
Maybe Natalie knows about this, but it's certainly around AI and watermarking of stuff. There's a huge amount of talk about that now and being built into systems, but I simply don't know how that's going to work. I haven't seen the use case, and particularly news is always much more messy than other. I mean, around things like music video or something like that, or a Netflix doc. Yes, but news is always just more messy. It's always more mixed up.
Yeah, watermarking is also part of the legal proposals on the right to authenticity. There has been a lot of criticism at this as well because it's really easily circumvented. So it's not bulletproof.
Okay, we have time for one more question, the last question.
Well, there's so many dossiers right now, but I think everything around the AI Act has traveled a bit under the radar of media organizations, partly because media is not qualified at high-risk sector yet, so would not bear the brunt of the legal obligations. On the side of policymakers, I was actually really flabbergasted when a couple of years ago I was in a conference on journalism AI, and then the Minister of Justice, Girouva, said that this conference was for her the first time to think about AI and journalism, that there's actually a link between those two dossiers. So I do think that it's simply not on the radar, and wrongly so. Yeah, that's true.
Why I think this is interesting. I mean, even if journalism is not affected directly by the law, it will be affected by the regulation of the law. So maybe it will be legitimate.
Yes, but regarding DSA and DMA, also the European Media Freedom Act, there was actually also quite a lot of involvement from media organizations, especially public broadcasting, actually. So it's only the AI Act that, for some bizarre reasons, has been needs to yet be detected, although they should hurry up because it's almost finished.
Okay, so we have to close the session here. Thank you very much, Nick, John, Natalia, and Alex, for sharing your views. And now we have another roundtable on decision making. So you are welcome to join to this roundtable. And again, thank you very much.